Welcome, Fabi.
Thanks. I'm Magnus.
Yeah, I guess
of this video.
We're looking at a game I played against Magnus. So you were playing with black pieces, and you did commentate on the event.
Yeah.
So this was the fourth game of the second match, right? I played e4.
Yeah, I guess a better question is what's the psychology when you're...
Yeah, I just lost a game, so that's and this, like, I was on the brink, right? I had to win this to survive in the match.
Yeah.
Not for very long, as it turned out, but I thought I should stick to the same opening. Like, that was the first question. Like, you have to make the first decision first, and the first one is, like, what do you do in the opening? Do you play e4? Do you play something else?
Italian or Spanish?
Yeah, do you play the Spanish? Do you play the Italian? I mean, if I play the Spanish, I assume that he goes for the Marshall. Like, this is his go-to in a safe situation because he's preparing for World Championship match, more than one, and yeah, it's just like his main opening. So I played this already in the second game. I didn't win the game, but it worked out very well. Like, I outplayed him in that second game. So it was based on this Bishop G5 move, which I've played before, which is like a really combative move.
Yeah, the whole idea is to get black to attack you a bit, right?
Yeah, you're pinning the knight, so you're provoking black to break the pin in one way or another. Because you can't tolerate the pin forever. At some point you're going to have to do something with the knight, because very often your maneuver in Spanish is to, like, bring this knight from c6 over to g6. But if you do that, then you allow bishop takes f6 and the spoiling of your pawn structure. So you can do this first. You can first play c3 and then bishop g5. There are, like, some intricacies which aren't really too important, but and most people don't even know what they are or understand them, including myself. So, but there is some reason to, like, start with bishop g5 as well. So of course black wants to chase the bishop away first. Like, there's no downside to that because white doesn't want to give the bishop pair up, right? There's no reason to ever do that.
Why is it too early to do this now?
It's not bad. Like, you can do this. The bishop will drop back, and one of the main things which I do a chessable course on the Archangel, where, like, a very common theme is what do you do when bishop g5 happens? And one thing I, like, always point out is that it's safer to do this before castling, because after you've castled, like, if you just imagine that this, let's say this position has happened, then, or like something like this, where this could happen, then this sacrifice, which is really common, becomes much more potent with the king on the king side, because now you can't, like, your rook is out of the way. You can't use your rook to maybe attack the bishop or to go down the h-file, and then you get hit with this terminally pinned knight, and queen f3 is coming, and sometimes the knight maneuvers around to, like, put some extra pressure on. So, like, one of the things I always say is, if you just go back to the moment that you mentioned, where you asked about g5, is it's much safer to do this before you castle.
Right. So
you don't allow the sacrifice, because now it's just stupid to take it. It's just losing the piece, basically. For two pawns, like, white takes, and one small trick is that black can actually just like unpin the knight, or you can do other stuff. So what happens is white will put the bishop on g3, black will reinforce the pawn, white will make some, like, generic developing move, which they're basically all the same. Either you can castle, you can play c3, you can play knight bd2, but let's say c3. Then black has to decide what to do with this bishop, because at some point it's going to get hit with d4. We don't know when, but at some point it will. So usually black moves the a pawn, drops the bishop, let's say here, drops the bishop back to a7.
Yeah.
White will, like, develop. Yeah, bishop goes back to a7 or something. Usually white tries to deal with the question of, like, what to do with this bishop as well, because there's sometimes knight a5 coming. It's like, play a4, just make sure that you can expand on the king side, drop the bishop back. And this is, like, a huge position with thousands of games. And what's actually happening in this position, nobody really knows. It's a crazy position. There's a lot of theory. It's, I guess, objectively equal, but it's one of the sharpest positions in modern theory. So that's...
To be clear, this is a modern concept.
Yeah.
Like this for black.
Yeah, to actually weaken your structure, and the downside for white is that the bishop on g3 is really passive. The downside for black is, like, where do you actually put your king? If you put it on the king side, then maybe h4 comes. Or maybe at some point d4 you sack a pawn, but you liberate the bishop. So there's a lot of intricacies in this position. The funny thing is, very often black's plan is to, let's say, play a move like queen e7 just to fortify e5, and then take 3 moves to maneuver this knight here or h7, either way. Because the idea is to go to f8 and then to g6. And the reason why the knight is so good on g6 is because then you can prepare h5, and imagining that white is castled at some point, h4 would now just lose a pawn. So how do you deal with the h4 threat? You can't play h4 yourself, h4 would win a bishop, and if you do this, suddenly black just starts h4, g4, and breaking down the king side. So that's like...
This guy's really strong.
Yeah. That's why you put it on a7, so you don't have to worry about d4, but also no b4, nothing to disturb that bishop, which is so strong. So let's go back to this moment after bishop g5.
Yeah.
Because
none of that happened.
None of that happened. It's one thing that could have happened, like it's a very legitimate move, g5 or d6 followed by g5.
Yeah.
But I had a feeling that Magnus wouldn't like those positions.
Yeah.
Especially in the situation. So he dropped the bishop back.
Yeah, he went back to e7.
Yeah.
That, I haven't seen that a lot. I feel like most people will just go for d6, g5. This is rare, or am I wrong?
By theory, I think g5 and d6 is a more common approach.
Okay.
But when people are surprised, they tend to do this. Because they know that they're not going to get into like huge tactical danger here.
Okay.
And black takes a move, basically wastes a move. Could play bishop c5 followed by bishop e7. But the idea is that the bishop on h4 is going to get traded off. So white is also taking like 2 moves, allowing h6 with tempo. And then at some point, black will try to move this knight, trade off darks for bishops, and from black's point of view, it's kind of a good thing. You've traded off some pieces when you're you have a bit less space. So I played a move bishop g3, which I'd already played before, like I don't know, maybe it was a month or 2 months ago in the Isle of Man. I played this against Nair, against Evgeny Nair. So it attacks the pawn. Now after d6, my bishop is really, really passive. But there's a trick. I played a4. The idea of this move is to expand, but also not to allow knight a5, so I can always play bishop a2 after knight a5. And the trick happens after knight h5. Now we have this. So knight h5 would be a great move, just to attack this bishop, just to trade off and get the bishop pair. But knight takes e5 opens up an attack on the knight. And if knight g3,
here you have...
there might be like a million really good things, like knight f7 is probably the strongest.
Yeah.
I mean, knight c6 would also be like winning the pawn, but knight f7 is probably the strongest.
Yeah.
And if you take on e5, there's actually a little trick for black. In case of queen h5, this actually loses the game.
Yeah, and then...
Here's bishop g4.
And then if there's
just like a little sidestep and the queen is trapped on h5, and that's game over. But luckily for white, there's bishop takes e5, and intermezzo. And then after recapture, the knight eventually falls and the queen won't be trapped on h5, and white's at the pawn, probably actually 2 in this case, still end up being so. So this is a trick and the reason why black cannot play knight h5 and why Magnus did not play knight h5. So instead he castled. Pretty self-explanatory, just gained the king to safety.
Yeah.
I played a5. Now the idea is maybe I want to play a6, I'm not sure yet, but I just want to gain space. At some point it'll be useful. And Magnus played bishop e6. He played this in 2 games against me. In the second game of the match, and in the 4th game. And in the second game I got an advantage, but I didn't win. And in the 4th game, he repeated it, which I was a little bit surprised by, but maybe he had found some small improvement in that game. So I was happy in general because I was able to exchange bishops, and we get a really imbalanced pawn structure. Black has the open f-file, but doubled e-pawns, so less flexibility in the center. Black has a less pawn breaks because d5 would really weaken the e5 pawn, so black doesn't want to do that, especially with the bishop on g3. On the other hand, the bishop is passive, so black is counting on that. And in the first game, I think my approach was simply to castle, and Magnus played this really interesting concept b5. He's basically expanding, he's trying to gain space on the queen side, and he's saying, if you allow me to gain space, that's great, and if you capture en passant, then I'm happy to exchange off some pieces. And this is what happened in the first game. I decided just to take a different approach just because I wanted to surprise him, but I don't know if my approach was very good.
This, to be clear, it didn't seem like preparation of any sort? This just sort of seemed
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it was just his positional feeling was like, I need to play b5.
Right, as opposed to just sit and...
Yeah, you can play a6, but then you don't have any pawn breaks on the queen side.
Yeah.
And you can also play b6, but then you allow a6, which is probably what I would have done.
Which is kind of annoying.
And then you can play b5 later, but you'd rather do this in one move to gain time.
It's hard to tell if this is probably more an asset for white than a liability, right? Like
I would guess so. But it's a really hard
That looks a little annoying, but I guess it takes time and...
Yeah, that's why Magnus plays b5 first.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to take the time to play b6 and b5. So I played c3, because I figured he's going to play b5 again. And I was like, okay, I'll play queen b3. which is what I played.
Which is a fork.
Yeah, it's attacking 2 pawns, so he defended the more important pawn.
Yeah, you gotta defend.
And then I realized that in this position, which is what I was first aiming for, I was thinking, okay, he gains the pawn back, but I was thinking, the knight on c6 is kind of unstable now. My queen on a4 is looking at it. I'm going to play knight d2, I'm going to chase the knight back. And then I had this realization that at some point he's just going to play a6 in this position, and then he's just going to attack my pawn on a5. And I'm always going to be tied to the weakness of that pawn. So I can put my knight on c4, like this type of position, but the knight is always going to be tied to that pawn. If at some point he plays like knight h5, trades off this bishop, if he defends the pawn, plays d5, I'll just start to potentially drop the a5 pawn.
Yeah.
And so I realized this scenario is both easy for him to play and probably not really in my favor. So with that in mind, queen b3 was a stupid move. But I had already played it, so I was like, okay, well, what do I do now? Forget if I castled first or played knight d2 first. I don't think it actually... I think I played knight d2 first, but it doesn't really matter very much. He defended the pawn. Castle, we got this position, I forget the move order, but these moves are going to occur in one way or another. Like, he's going to have to defend his pawn at some point, I'm going to have to castle at some point.
Yep.
And now he played knight h5. So, pretty clear, I thought, idea to trade off the bishop potentially, but very often I want to take with the f-pawn.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because it makes my king a little bit more secure. I can like tuck the king away here. And also I have the f-file now. And he's always tied to a weakness of this pawn, so I was actually happy with this scenario. I didn't mind it at all. That's why I played rook fd1, because I wanted potentially to move with my knight to f1, and then support d4. And if he takes, I was happy to take with f1. That's why he went g5. So I kind of expected this move, because it's very aggressive. He wants to play g4. In case of d4, he's playing g4, and then I'll drop a pawn. Even if I don't play d4, he's playing g4, my knight goes back to e1, then he plays bishop g5, like let's just imagine black is to move here. Bishop g5 comes, suddenly my other knight is attacked. Now this bishop is really active before he was passive. He can take at some moment if he wants, he can also play knight f4 if he wants, or he can double on the f-file. So I just didn't like this scenario. And that's why I played h3.
Still following that plan, fg.
I was actually thinking he would go for this, because now he has h5, he has a little hook to target with g4.
Is there any merit to this move, or is it just losing a pawn?
Yeah, I think I don't mind, because after I take, I have the triple pawns, but they're extra. One of them is an extra pawn, and I have my plan to play d4.
Yeah.
Or I can also maneuver my knight around, and his king is just as airy as mine. I would argue even more so, because although my pawns are kind of funny, they do still provide some cover for my king.
Yeah.
So this was an option. Also, he could have played h5 first, and I was also thinking like here, we might get this type of scenario, where I play knight h2, and yeah, my king doesn't have so much cover, but the knights they're kind of defending.
Yeah, there's so much room.
There's a lot of room there, and we'll see this in the game as well, that his king, well, my pieces aren't looking at it now, but eventually the queen comes back c2, e2, the pieces start to stream into the king side, knight goes to e3, rook to f1, and you can actually see black's king becoming pretty weak. So Magnus decided not to go for that.
Right.
Instead he played knight to f4. Okay, I realized that I don't want to lose this pawn. I also probably don't want to allow a knight e2 check, and if I play knight f1, this comes.
Yeah.
And gh, rook f3, and well, that's the end of the match. Because I lose my pawn, I probably lose the game, and definitely not winning. So he took with the rook. He didn't want to close that file for his rooks, very logical, and he also keeps his pawn structure a bit more flexible, so g4 is an option.
And just for the viewers at home, this undoubles your pawns, but it's a very bad move.
Yeah, this is probably a mistake, because now I get the center.
Yeah, and that's not good.
And this knight is actually, it could get targeted with h5, but he's probably not in time. I'll probably play d5, I'll probably open it up, and he's going to, the problem for him is light squares. Like imagine the knight drops back, the knight comes to d4. You can really see black's light squares becoming very vulnerable, because he has a dark squared bishop, but he doesn't have a light squared bishop. And
also,
the knight's...
Just not to cut you off, but just to be clear, this also looks really, really nasty. I guess DE 94 and like...
I would be very tempted. Even, d5, probably 94 is just crushing, because now 95 is a deadly threat, but if e d5, rook d5, g5 is falling, this is exactly what black needs to avoid. Probably loses on the spot for black. So e5, like the only thing to calculate would be g4, but then you probably have knight d4 here, and you assume that with black's pieces so passive, that things probably work out for white. Yeah. And sometimes there's ideas of queen c2.
Yeah, I was going to say, that looks pretty bad.
Sometimes, I was looking at ideas like that in the game. We'll just see in a second.
Yeah. Even here.
He played rook f4, and I played d5. Oh, sorry, we did seal tempo. Rook f4 and d4. This is what happened.
Yeah.
I suddenly had this realization. So after rook f4, I played d4, and he played rook f8 because he wants to. He kind of envisioned that I'm playing d5, or even d takes e5, but he wants the rook double on that file in either case.
Mm-hmm.
So in case of d5, I actually wasn't sure if this is like a bad move, but I figured that he might not even take this pawn. He might just start playing h5 or something, and I didn't even calculate it. I was just like let's say we get this position. I don't know if I want to see this g4 is coming, and knight on c6. If this knight ever moves, comes to e5, f2 is falling. I was like, I really don't want this scenario. So that's why I didn't take on e5. Instead, I played d5 because I'm gaining a tempo on the knight. And in case of e d5, I have queen d5 with check.
Yeah.
And then if the king moves somewhere, I can play, let's say king e8. I can play knight to f1, and again, I have the light squares. I also have a threat of knight takes e5, potentially. This could be a very serious threat here. But also knight e3 is coming, knight to f5, and so on. So this is about the light squares. The f5 square in particular is very weak. And black doesn't have time really to generate an initiative here. So that's why he didn't take. He played a move which I thought was the most natural one, knight to d8.
Yeah.
So if I takes, he's actually very happy to trade queens. Because let's say if I take back, he takes with the queen, so there's no pin after knight takes e6. And if I trade again, knight e6, and the knight is coming into c5, e4 is a really serious weakness. And my knights they're kind of, like they're not eyeing the squares that I need them to, which is that f5 square. Like if you imagine this, that's really good. But this is not very impressive for me.
It's kind of hopeless, like, that's weak, everything is weak.
Yeah, everything suddenly becomes weak. And also I helped black develop the knight from d8, where it was passive into the game. So I didn't want that scenario at all. Instead I played knight to f1, and I kind of envisioned what would happen in the game, because he started to play the most natural moves.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is I wasn't really worried about rook takes f3. It's a very common exchange sacrifice. But I was thinking, black takes, and we simply can play, either king g2 or knight g3, I wasn't sure, but let's say knight g3. And then at some point the knight is going to come into f5. Like there's going to be a trade of pawns on e6, but also I'll just play king g2. And then maybe I'll break with c4, and he doesn't have an attack here.
He has one attacking piece.
He has one attacking piece, yeah. So. And the knight is coming into a very, very nice outpost on f5. So I wasn't worried about this sacrifice. I was thinking that h5 is what he wants to play, because he wants to play g4, he wants to chase the knight away, and weaken the f2 pawn.
Yep.
And, by the way, one thing I just want to mention, like one of the realizations I had when I played knight f1 is what we just spoke about earlier. If rook takes e4, I have this queen c2.
Yeah.
And at some point, the rook will have to move, either after e d5 or d5 or immediately, and queen g6 comes, followed by queen h6 with check, and so on and so forth, and black is losing a lot of pawns.
It's pretty rare to skewer something to a square.
Yeah. But you might think like a bishop skewers a rook to a queen or a king.
But to a square.
Yeah, but not to an empty square. No, that's true. It's a kind of unusual pattern. So he played h5, which I expected. And at first I was thinking, why don't I play rook d2? Because after g4, now I overprotect my f2 pawn. But then I realized that in this position, he'll play something like rook e4, queen c2. Now he takes on d5, and I can take back, sure. Yeah. Queen f5, there's knight g3. Oh no, sorry, there's rook e1 here. Actually, I didn't even realize that.
Oh wow.
I didn't even realize that.
I totally realized that. That was. I didn't even.
Once it was on the board, I saw it.
Yeah. Oops.
But let's say I play knight g3 instead of rook takes d5.
Yeah.
So I'm attacking the rook. Now he has to move it.
Yeah.
And now I have this check, and I have a draw, but a draw doesn't give me anything in the match.
Right.
I lose the match, so I have to win this game. And I realized that although it looks like I have a lot of pieces aiming at the king side, once this rook drops back to f7, I actually don't really have anything besides potentially. Well, now I don't even have perpetual check anymore. But let's say I take on g4, then he can play like queen f5 or something, and my attack is gone pretty quickly because he actually has all his pieces defending. So
knight g4, rook g8.
Then queen f7, queen g, knight g3 in the end probably saves white. But
I just thought, am I crazy? Isn't this just winning?
Oh my god, queen f7, knight f7.
Yeah,
no, I'm hallucinating. That knight is hit.
Everything is defended. I was like, this is just you defend yourself.
Oh wait, but not really, because. And knight f6.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
So there's a lot of crazy tactics that you have to watch out for.
That's crazy.
But I feel like queen f5 is probably
Or was this? Oh, this was here.
Yeah, I was here. So let's go back a few moves.
Wow. It's Queen C2.
Because that was just a move that I was considering.
Yeah.
That was just like, what if Rook D2? With the rooks on F8 and F4.
Rook, getting all the rook shuffled.
So he had played H5, and I was like, why don't I... And then I realized I really have to sacrifice this pawn. So the best way to do it is to put some extra pressure on the D5 pawn, the F5 square, and also the G4 pawn. So I played knight E3, he played G4, he took knight H2, and here he took on F2, which ended up being a serious mistake, but I thought it was the most natural move, because, okay, G4 is falling, so, I mean, it turns out that you shouldn't take on F2, but, like, what's more natural than taking a kingside pawn?
Yeah.
Exposing white's king. And he was definitely counting on this move. He was thinking, okay, it's most logical to take with the knight that's on the rim, leaving this knight in the center. And I'm not sure what exactly he wanted, but I think maybe it was this move. Like leaving the rook to its own devices, but then you take on E3, and you end up with a really nasty pin, which I don't know exactly what the evaluation of this position is, but it looks like black has a lot of compensation. So I didn't want any part of that, and that's why I took with the knight E. I realized that the knight on E3 is actually not a great piece, and I really need to clear it. And one of my main points of this move is revealed when he retreated his rook, probably thinking, okay, I mean, I'm not losing material. This is still attacked. Maybe ED5 will be the idea to put some pressure on the knight. But my idea was to play C4.
How far in advance did you see C4?
This was when I played knight E3.
Okay, wow.
Because my first intention was to bring the rook, I wanted to bring stuff to the king side. I wanted to checkmate him. So my first intention was rook D3. It was like, okay, ED5, rook G3, and you bring stuff to the king side. But then I realized that this wasn't so effective. I don't remember exactly the line that I saw that kind of dissuaded me from this one. But I think it was like the bishop coming to G5 potentially, and then the queen coming to F7. And I was like, the rook on G3 doesn't actually do so much.
Right.
What I really need is a queen. The queen is going to be a really dangerous attacker, and also it gains tempo because I'm threatening ideas with C5 as well, right?
Yeah.
And even C5 maybe to undermine D5 pawn. So here I realized the situation is desperate, and I was down to 4.5 minutes, but he was also getting even lower than me. So probably the way he defended wasn't good, but it's already in a situation where he's objectively in a bad position, and also he has to make really difficult moves to even maintain that bad position. So he took queen G3. Now we're coming in with discovered checks, knight E5, knight F6, all these. So he moved the king to H7, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if it matters, H7 or H8. Then he moved back to G8 because he didn't want to let queen H6 with check.
Yeah.
And now I introduced another piece into the attack. And here it's already kind of hopeless, it's already dead lost, although I think there were even more accurate ways than what I did. So basically after rook G3, it's already checkmate is threatened. So he decided to block with bishop G5.
Go for
rook G3. And what did he play now? Queen G7, I think, right?
Yeah.
So he's just stopping knight H6 check, kind of. I mean, knight H6 actually wins a queen. But he's saying, okay, at least I'll get two pieces for it, and I have 20 seconds, so I have to do something.
Yeah.
What I did was probably not best. I could probably take on E6. What I did was probably good, but not... I was just thinking, okay, I take on G5, and if he takes on F3, I'm just up in exchange now, so I win. But then he played this really clever move, King F7. I was like, this is not that simple, because rook H8 is coming, and then after the queen moves, then suddenly bishop F4 actually traps my rook. So I have to do something here. And queen H5, king E7, I didn't see the continuation, because if I ever take on E5, there's this really nasty intermezzo, it's check.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit in a panic. I was like, what do I do here? Finally, I decided I'll play knight F2 because now there's no check from E3 and I'm pinning the bishop and also threatening queen H5. And after king E7, I'll play rook C1. This is not the best move, objectively, but it had a very strong effect because he had 10 seconds. He had no time to figure out what to do here.
Yeah.
Which was his best chance was rook takes E3.
Yeah. Did you see that?
I saw it after I played rook C1.
Oh, yeah.
But I wasn't worried because I was like, okay, I mean, what's the big deal? Take, and I'm still up in exchange.
Yeah.
Here he can fight on. That's the only thing. It's still bad. Yeah, king D7, I guess. He fights on. I mean, probably he'll lose eventually, but the game, with little time, you used to always have some hope.
Yeah.
But he didn't see rook F3. I mean, the idea of rook C1 is he can't take it because his rook takes G7. So I just wanted to include another piece in the attack. He went here, I went here, so still pinning the bishop, he defended it. Now, I could have taken on e6 with the queen, there's a million ways to win, but I was like, okay, first I'll get the rook out of attack, so just in case I blunder, I don't blunder my rook at least. Rook c7 is a threat, he defended king d8. I took on e6 with the pawn so that the knight would be attacked. And the main point is that if he tries to start any counterplay, I just take queen to h2. They say the knight is the best defender of the king, yeah. And the knight defends all the squares, in particular the h1 square, and he's down a rook, and so he resigned after I took on e6, and that was the game.
A couple questions. Not about the game, because I think a lot of that was answered. Plus, we could probably analyze that for like another 30 minutes. I'm curious, when you're like moments away from winning a game like this, do you still ever get nervous?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was... When he played king f7, I was nervous. Because that was still the moment when I was like, you still can mess this up.
We can set that up. I don't know if... I will not remember the exact configuration, but it's because it was very unorthodox, but I think it was...
Knight is on d8.
Yeah, rook is...
I think rook was on f8.
f8. Yeah,
so it's king f7, because I hadn't expected the move. He had like a few seconds. I had a few minutes, so I was like, okay, this is a relatively calm situation under the circumstances. But I did have memories of this game too, where I also had a few minutes and he had a few seconds and I had a winning position. I was like, well, you don't want to repeat history over and over, unless it's good history. So that's why I decided to make a move where I can't possibly be blundering like knight f2. I was like, you can't be blundering.
Right.
There's no checks, there's no way to attack white's pieces. So it took me a second to I think it's a very good practical choice. And it took me a second to kind of collect myself so I wouldn't decide to go, because I think the first instinct is queen h5, knight e5, something, try to beat your opponent immediately. Well, sometimes a calm approach. And after knight f2, I was relatively calm, because I was like, he has no checks, he has nothing really to attack. Things could go kind of wrong, but not really, really wrong.
You've played Magnus, obviously, I mean, I don't know the exact number of times, but a lot of times. Also on the biggest stage. Do you have a good enough read of him as a person and as a chess player that you know the kind of the kind of defender that he is?
Yeah, I've played Magnus a lot. Thing is, these days you don't actually need to read on him because he starts to curse in Norwegian.
Really?
Yeah, that's the thing. People, I guess, can't really hear it at home. I have no idea what he's saying.
Right.
I assume it's standard curse words in Norwegian under his breath. And it happens when there's no more hope. All the hope is gone. So when I beat him in Norway chess, and he had blundered and already it was a completely hopeless situation, and he basically resigned a move later, he started to curse under his breath in Norwegian. Wow. I assume curse. I mean, what else would he be saying?
Damn, this guy's really good.
Or why am I such an idiot?
Yeah.
With a few choice words in between. And so he was doing that in a lot of the game 1 matches. Because there were a lot of moments when he was probably upset about the course of the game, and also game 2 and this game, around rook g3. I don't remember exactly which moment he started to. But once my rook came to g3, and it was there's not much more black can do here, because I think he always keeps hope, and especially if it's out of control.
Yeah.
But when your opponent's in control and he feels like there's no more hope, because no matter what I do here, my opponent does basically control the outcome.
Right.
Then yeah, you can tell that he's losing. He's maybe a bit less demonstrative about it than, let's say, Hikaru. I would say Hikaru's physically demonstrative.
Right.
He just falls back in his chair and he doesn't curse, but he's you can see that he's despondent or just very distressed about the situation. While Magnus is distressed in a less obvious way. And I'm not, I get distressed, but I don't show it. But yeah, there's, especially in a classical game, in Rapid and Blitz, you don't have time to feel the pain until after. But in a classical game, sometimes you have 40 minutes on the clock and nothing you can do, and that's just a hopeless feeling. Yeah, it's interesting, the emotions that you or other people, you can imagine what they're feeling, but also because you've been there, and also you know what you're feeling as well. It's interesting.
Fascinating. Thank you, Fabi.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Damn, lost to Fabiano.